Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Mike, Russ, what's going on?
Well, going to chat a minute about the baseball playoffs, and we'll chat a minute about ESPN. So Mike was probably watching the game the other night when Aaron Judge was playing in the rain, and that game first was just delayed, right, Mike?
It was rain delayed in the sixth inning. Judge was the leadoff guy in the bottom of the seventh.
Right. So we'll leave it there for a minute. So apparently, there were talks behind the scenes with ESPN executives and the ball clubs about continuing that game so ESPN could show Aaron Judge getting up and maybe hitting the 61st home run, even though the field was a sopping mess.
Yes, and the contributing factor was it was the last game of the series. It was an official game. It was in the top of the seventh. It was 1-0 Yankees. The Yankees were heading out to play Toronto, so they had to get on a plane. The Red Sox were heading out on a plane to play Baltimore. So the later that this went on, the longer it would take for them to get to the airport, to get out. And the Yankees, even when they ended that game at like 10:30, Russ, they didn't get to Toronto until 3:30 in the morning.
Yeah, because you got to go through customs and all that. So thankfully, the Yankees and Red Sox decided, hey, this game's over. But also the Yankees were telling ESPN, listen, if the game goes back, we're probably not playing Aaron Judge. It's not worth it. We don't want him to get hurt playing on this bad field. But this is the pressure now that ESPN put on the Yankees to get Judge to bat to hopefully hit his 61st homer, even in horrific weather. So how do you feel about that, Kev?
Well, I think it wasn't successful, which it should have been. So no harm, no foul. You know what I mean? Like, baseball.
I still mind ESPN for asking and pushing
but that's
on that.
They're paying millions of dollars. I don't have a problem with them asking, but the right decision was made, and the teams knew better, and the right But I mean, if you're like, it's not their job to think about what's best for baseball. Their job is to make the most for their shareholders. And so I don't begrudge them the right to ask, but like, it would have been a story if baseball would have said, yeah, we're going to trot him out there and let him hit. But I read that, and I shrugged about it just because, it was the right thing to do. I mean, they made the right call on it. That's the main thing.
Well, remember, because last Friday, the big controversy was the game was on Apple TV, and if Judge hit his 61st home run, nobody would see it. And everybody's saying, well, Apple, you can subscribe to Apple TV on a 7-day trial and watch it for free. The only problem is you have to give them your credit card number, you have to subscribe, and then you have to tell them that you don't want to subscribe. So that, if you don't want to go through that whole rigmarole just to watch one game, I mean, it's unbelievable sort of how everybody is sort of jumping through hoops because of this. And I understand it because it's historical and everybody wants to watch it. But boy, the networks and other outlets are really, sort of dancing around just to hope that they carry that 61st home run. And right now, Judge he's feeling the pressure. You can tell. And I don't blame the Blue Jays for this, but I don't care what you say. When you have a 3-2 count 4 times yesterday and you walk 3 times, they're pitching around you. They really are.
Yeah, man, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I don't expect them not to, because they're in a race for a wild card spot.
Yeah.
It's not like they have to be magnanimous and say, here, Aaron, hit it out of the ball.
No, but you also have to remember, going back in baseball lore, with the exception of Denny McClain, who just didn't give 2 watts with Mickey Mantle because that was his hero, most pitchers don't want to be that guy that gives up a record-breaking home run.
Yeah, I mean, it's like tanking, in professional sports. People think it's players. It's never players.
No.
And the same thing goes for these type situations. The pitchers don't like to be told how to pitch. And they don't like to be taken out of games, and and they get their say in these situations. But and the thing about Judges, when it was on Apple, I mean, wouldn't it have been on Major League on MLB Network like 43 seconds later? I mean,
Well,
half the time now, there's so many good games on. Like I find myself just going to MLB Network and just kind of seeing just the best of 10 games, and that's probably what I would do. And that night, I would just check on MLB Network, and 43 seconds after it happened, you would see it.
It might happen this Friday again if he doesn't hit a homer soon.
Well, that's the thing. It's like they MLB Network and ESPN were doing live look-ins of judges at bats. So the annoying thing was Michael Kay had to do the ident for the Yes Network every time Judge Kay says, "This is Michael Kay along with David Cohn for Paul O'Neill. We're at Yankee Stadium where Aaron Judge is going for." And it was like the same mantra because he's got it on a card probably over and over. And it's like, okay, I get it. It's like just hit the damn home run and get it over with, please. And that's my attitude right now. Please, I want to see him do it. I'm sure he wants to do it. His mom is following him. Roger Maris's kids are following him. Just hit the home run and get it over with, please.
Yeah, why don't you tweet that to Roger Maris's kids?
Yeah.
I'm sure you would enjoy that, Russ.
I just can't, to be honest with you, I'm stunned, Mike, that you've somehow managed even to take the joy out of a historic Yankee event. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this is a pretty big deal. Yankee fan.
I'm the black hole of joy.
I mean, you really are. Like, you should be kind of excited about this, but just get it over.
I just want him to do it. It's like, get it over.
I mean, come on. You got to take a step back now and then and say to yourself, like, why does it irritate you that the guys have to introduce themselves because they're going to be appearing on different stations all the time? Like, think about that. Like, why does that take away from your enjoyment of the moment?
Ironically, Michael Kay is annoyed with it because he has a talk show in New York, and he's like, "Yeah, we have to ident every single time we come." So that just confirms my annoyance. He's annoyed with it, so I feel justified.
Yeah, but you're a fan of the event. That's what I don't get. Like, should be a big deal for you, and the fact that you're somehow you're bothered because it's not happening the way you want it to. So
yeah, and just to answer this, Tony Soprano, I remember every employee who screws up every order that I ever make because they do it all the time. So, I go to McDonald's, and if we had ordered a breakfast sandwich on the way back to your house when we were driving, Kevin, they had screwed up my bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit, I would have asked you to turn around so I could get it corrected.
Well, I mean, to sum up your personality, like, you don't like ketchup.
Nope.
And there are a lot of people who don't like a lot of foods, but they don't go on and on about the evils of ketchup or the evils of the foods they don't like. Like, I've been with you at a restaurant, I don't know, 5 times, 10 times, not all that many times, but every time we've been there, I've heard your philosophy on ketchup, like the anti-ketchup venom, and I mean, honestly, like, it's all right if you don't like food. I mean, it's great. I mean, there's all food we don't like, but we don't go on and on about it. We don't hate the food, for what it is on our table.
My life is so vacant that I have to occupy it with the bitterness of my hatred of ketchup and mustard and a few other.
I just think Hockey Buzz should do a documentary on Mike and just title it Annoyed. Annoyed would be the name of the documentary.
Yeah. I wondered, though, because I never noticed, do you have the ketchup removed from the table if it's sitting on the table? So.
Actually, you want to know something? If I go out to brunch and they have the bottle of ketchup on the table, and I like hot sauce on my eggs or on my omelet or on my home fries, I push the ketchup as far away from me as possible, just for the odd chance that I grab the ketchup by accident, which I've done once. I grabbed the ketchup thinking it was hot sauce because it was in a similar bottle, and I squeezed it, and I basically ruined the thing that I ordered. So,
well, Mike, some of the ingredients in hot sauce are also ingredients in ketchup.
No, Ron.
What do you mean, no? Of course there is.
No,
what do you think the base is?
Yeah,
tomatoes and vinegar. That's all it is.
It's not ketchup.
Okay.
Well, Mike, I have to tell you this: my wife doesn't eat a single condiment, so she's with you on this one. but not a single condiment has she.
Did she go on and on about it? I doubt it.
Oh, actually,
Because I've been to dinner with your wife too, and I don't
Yeah.
remember her ever giving me any indication about what her condiment habits are.
no, it never came up. But if it came up, Kevin, you would have heard about it. 'Cause,
Just,
it's definitely
just confirmation that your wife is as intelligent as she is beautiful. So
she
there
is. Thank you.
It says
Very
it
kind
says
of you.
right online, many hot sauces contain tomatoes. You should check your hot sauce, Mike. That's all I'm going to tell you.
I have.
Here we go. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Wednesday, September 28th, 2020.
I'm Michael Agello, and there is a difference between ketchup and tomato puree.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology. Not really.
I'm Kevin Allen, and that ketchup diatribe might actually be more interesting than what we have to talk about today.
Hey, I'm Eklund. You're watching HockeyBuzzcast on HockeyBuzz.com. I'm going to try to prove Kevin wrong. This is the podcast that comes every Monday through Friday to tell you when the comings going to the hockey world. And here we are today. We have some really interesting news that just came down to the wire, and I don't know what's the most. We're going to talk about the Florida Panthers in a little bit, which is actually an interesting team to discuss, I think. But before that, we have a John Tavares injury, Mike. We should talk about that first.
Yeah, we will. But let's go with the breaking news first.
Yeah, the breaking news is this. So this just came out, and I want everybody's opinion on this. It's CTV News reporting this that the feds tell the Canadian hockey players with KHL teams in Russia and Belarus to get out, to leave their team in Russia and Belarus.
I think this is a delayed. Is it Brittany Griner reaction? Because there were, I think, Canadian. Now from what Kevin said, the U.S. hasn't done this yet, but Canada has.
What U.S. has done is told all citizens, all American citizens, to leave the country.
Right. So that's
They're basically worried about. I mean, the whole situation with Griner is that she. I mean, vividly had some sort of CBD oil.
Well, for those who don't know that story, so she's a professional basketball player,
WNBA player,
WNBA player.
She was playing over in Russia, and she had this CBD oil, and she got arrested, and apparently it's illegal there. And I think they sentenced her to like 14 years in prison.
Yeah, they had a sham of a court case. She's been there for 7 months. They're trying to trade some sort of horrible person for her. And,
some Russian spy or something like that.
Yeah.
So what they're doing here is they're foreseeing the potential, especially in these desperate times where things are, there are protests in Russia, and it's not exactly the war in Ukraine is not exactly going great guns for Mr. Putin. That they are trying to avoid having sort of like a kidnapping or a hostage situation with some Canadian nationals. And I honestly don't blame them, because the situation over there is really unstable, and it's not above them doing that.
Here's what I would say. I didn't know how many Canadian players would be in Belarus, but if they are, I get it. Honestly, I understand if some were still trying to make a living. I don't know who would have sent you or told you, or why you would have thought it would be a good idea to go this year anyhow. Like you would just think you wouldn't have gone out of good sense.
Russ is right on. Like, I support their right to go and do this. It's we're free people, but I don't understand anybody who would have done that this season. I really don't. I mean, this is war going on, and I was thinking about this. I'm actually going to Italy on Saturday, and I was telling my wife, I just looked it up. It would be like, for me to find the war in Ukraine, I'd have to drive. It's no different than driving from Michigan to Florida. Europe is big, but it's also small. And, you just don't really know what's going to happen over there. And the Griner lesson is, like, they gave her the maximum sentence when normally, according to what I've read, that would be a 1 or a 2 year sentence. And she got like a 9+ year sentence. So they clearly are punishing, Americans, and, wanted to get this arms dealer out, and now they're going to, train that for that. So, again, I just don't understand why anybody would go over there and play. And, I get that, you got to make a living, but I would take less and go play in Switzerland if I was going to go over, or, and they don't pay nearly as well as KHL, but still.
Yeah, there's other leagues over there too. That's another good point, Kevin. I mean, there are other places these players can play, and then probably will make a little bit less, but they'll still play.
Right.
And even that's, I mean, just to be clear, this is not like Canada saying you have to come back.
No,
but they're saying that they are worried about their well-being based on.
They're warning them because hey, it's not like they're not going to try and get them out if they had to, but they're also saying, listen, you should get out so we don't have to, have this become a big thing.
And
this is a political Charlie Yankee Alpha for the government as well. They're basically saying, don't say we didn't warn you.
Right.
So
exactly.
if you're going to stay over there, we'll try to get you back. But, when your family comes to us and say, what are you doing? We're going to raise our hands and say, well, we're doing all we can. But, we did tell you
We wanted
to go home. So,
and how ironic is it that this announcement comes on the day that it's the 50th anniversary of arguably the most impactful international event in terms of hockey, maybe not that or the Miracle on Ice, and that today's.
I'm reviewing this currently, so that's clearly
the 50th anniversary of Game 8 Canada Russia. So it's I mean, I don't know if we want to spend a couple minutes.
I do want to spend a couple minutes on that series because it was young for me. I don't remember it when it happened, but I was listening, and one of the more interesting things, and everybody knows the story, of course, out there. If you don't know the story on this podcast, you probably are on the wrong podcast.
Yeah.
But we won't get into it.
No, we've been through it. We've talked about the movie. We've talked about this event. We've talked about everything.
The most interesting quote I heard today was from Phil Esposito on XM, who was being, and XM's doing a whole bunch.
They've been doing this whole thing for a week.
And the Phil Esposito thing, well, he was of course very, very vocal during the whole thing about being really upset with the Canadian public. Calling out the Canadians for losing.
Yeah, it was after Game 4 in Vancouver where they were lustily booed by the.
Yeah, he was really pissed off about that. But then in one of his quotes during this whole period of time, that he never. So one of the things he didn't say during that period of time, but just said recently, which I think was really interesting, was that this should have been an NHL team and not a Canadian team. Should have been called an NHL team and not a Canadian team because of the guys who weren't allowed to play in it. The guys who were like Hull and Hal and these guys who were in the WHA, so that the fact that these guys were Canadians and weren't allowed to play in this made no sense to anybody.
Well, no, I mean the thing was like because they left for the WHA, they were ineligible. I mean, Hal was with Houston, Hull was with Winnipeg, Bobby Orr was injured. So they were talking about, at that point, still three of the most impactful players. The one thing Ken Dryden had the one good year, I think it was 70 when he was a rookie. Really, it's like, okay, I think Cheevers was in the WHA that time. So it was Dryden and Esposito, and I can't remember the third goaltender. But really, Esposito was at the top of his game, but they played Dryden, which I've always criticized. I didn't understand why. There was a heavy Montreal Canadian, Toronto Maple Leaf influence there.
Yeah,
and
it definitely was.
Cornwall and Ellis and Henderson.
There were 6 Canadians on the team.
Yeah. So,
but I mean, just getting back to the point that Eklund was trying to make, because I think it's a really huge point.
Yeah.
They should have been able to play. It was really the NHL being petty.
Incredibly
about all this, because this was a Canadian team.
And yet, they still call it a Team Canada. You know what I mean?
They do. That's what I'm saying. It was completely wrong.
Yeah.
For them to do that, and it was simply because the league was petty about the whole thing. So
there was a lot of dissension in the Canadian team. Harry Sinden made some enemies, as he always would, and Vic Hatfield was one of them.
Yes,
great Ranger, and
they screwed, and this came out in the documentary that's on CBC. That's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And Scott Morrison, who's written a book on the Canada Russia series, they screwed Rick Hatfield and the 3 Sabres, Jocelyn Gavermont, Rick Martin, and Gilbert Perreault, who they said you're probably not going to play. They had a roster of over 30 players, and they said, okay, you're probably not going to play the rest of the series. If you want to stay with us, that's great. If you don't want, you're free to go back to North America and where your teams are having training camp. And they did. And then after the fact, they said, well, they sort of defected. The Sabre players didn't take a hit, but Vic Hatfield did. And Vic Hatfield at the time was one of the best forwards in the NHL who had scored 50 goals. And it was just, Alan Eagleson, Harry Sinden.
Yeah, it was Sinden. Here's what ended up happening. It was
incredibly political. I mean, let's just face it.
No, but this wasn't political. This was just Harry Sinden being a jerk.
Yes.
Was it just Harry Sinden being a coach? I mean, doesn't this happen in everything where they don't?
This is a little different. This came from Vic's diary. He so apparently at the first practice, after they get there, they're limbering up and everything. They're getting used to the rink, and then Sinden called just out of the blue, called up line rushes of 8 forward lines, and of course Hatfield wasn't on it, and that's when he realized all these other things that were promised to him. And that's where he said that Sinden was a liar and everything else were never going to happen. And so that's why he ended up leaving, because he knew he wasn't playing. And for whatever the reason, whatever the reason. But that was something that could have really derailed that team, too, with just the way that Harry Sinden ran it.
Yeah.
Just going back to my point, though, I mean, doesn't this always happen with every international team that a coach make a decision based on politics or based on the fact whether he likes the guy or doesn't like the guy? So why is that any different?
I'll tell you what, you're right, but I also think because these were all great players. It's not like you're getting on a team where, hey, this guy's making it instead of me. These are all all-star best players, whatever. But Sinden, to get them all there, told them different things about playing and playing time and everything else, and never had any interest in doing that. And once they were there and they were in Sweden and you already got them there, and then it was clear that they weren't going to play, he was like, well, you can stay if you want or not. And, that's kind of a lousy way to do it.
Well, it's also important to remember, I think, that they really, when they went to do this, it was really just an expedition, and there wasn't there wasn't as much stock being placed into it as it ended up becoming.
That's true.
Really. Right. It was really just like, this is an expedition, because after they win, after Canada wins the thing, they go and play another game in Czechoslovakia. Like they were still on a tour. There was an expedition going on still, so that people don't forget about that too. So
to that point, I mean, one of their best forwards in the first 4 games in Canada was Wayne Cashman. They go to play 2 games in Sweden as part of the exhibition. Cashman gets hurt in one of these games because they were like knockdown dragouts against the Swedish national team. I mean, if it was really a focus of Canada versus Russia, they would have never played those games in the middle of the series. That's how stupid it was.
Yeah, and Sweden wasn't very nice to the Canadians either, apparently. Like, just the way they were treated, everything, it rubbed the Canadian players the wrong way too, apparently.
See, and it's interesting because I go to the World Cup of Hockey, right, which is, again, which we had recently, right? And that was an event that was NHL run, right? It was NHL completely driven by the NHL, correct? And did we allow players that weren't playing NHL to play in that game in that tournament?
No, but we knew that was going to be the case, because
I thought we did, right? Like, there were some Russian players that weren't playing in the NHL that played in that tournament, correct?
I don't think so. You're talking about the
World Cup of Hockey.
World Cup of Hockey? No, I don't think so.
Austin Matthews was a first-round overall pick, and he played, but that was about it.
But no, I'm trying to remember like whether or not that was the case or not. I thought for sure there were some Russian players that were playing on the Russian.
I don't know. Call up the roster, because I don't.
Yeah, I got to do that. But I'm pretty. Yeah, I know. I'm almost positive it was.
Maybe, I don't know,
because
I
mean, that Russian team had a lot of players that we didn't always see in the NHL like anymore at that point. I mean, did Datsuk play? Am I losing my mind?
Okay, Bobrovsky.
Datsuk played in that World Cup of Hockey, Kevin.
But Bobrovsky, Varlamov, and Vasilevsky were the goalies. Emelin, Kulikov, Marchenko, Markov, Nestorov, Orlov, Zaitsev. Those are all NHL, except for I think Emelin was in the KHL at that point.
And there was a Nestorov too at that point.
Emelin was an NHL draft pick.
Yeah, there were 4 players that were playing in
the Marchenko.
There were 4 players that were playing in the KHL at that point. Right. And that was it. The rest were NHL players.
But they're still NHL property. That's my point. Nobody
Yes.
played in this tournament that wasn't NHL property.
Well, and the other thing, they almost had to do that because, as I've been pointing out for a while, that no one seems to be paying attention to. We haven't had a lot of Russians in the NHL for a long time now. You know,
Yeah.
Right.
we've been a lot of time we're on under 30.
Yeah.
So it's been an issue, but
I
There's
just
a high-end Russians, Kevin. It feels like we can put together one good team, but we don't have the
oh yeah, the
depth
best.
of Russians.
I mean, the best Russians are over here.
Yeah, but
you
the
know,
depth
I mean-
Russians, you're right. I mean, the depth guys
Yeah.
aren't here.
But there's a reason for that, Act. The other guys get paid more over there
Right.
as medium players because they're stars over there, and then the best guys know they're going to get paid here. That's why.
Well, sometimes, but the other issue is, and I've had discussions with Russian players on this, that they like the lifestyle better. It's a shorter season. It starts earlier. It's over. Their friends and family are there. The adjustment for Russian players over here is actually probably the worst of the Europeans. They just have a hard time. A lot of them don't speak any English when they come over, and so it's just easier.
I just want to illustrate this point because somebody reacted to my Ken Dryden comment. Okay, Ken Dryden. Remember, this tournament was in September of 1972. Dryden had played one playoff. What do you want, a Stanley Cup, and one regular season where he played 64 games, and he was the number one goalie for Team Canada. Esposito had 2 full seasons, but he won a Vezina, and I think he had 15 shutouts that year. But my point is, Ken Dryden was not an established goaltender in the league. We're looking at Ken Dryden in the prism of he won what?
No, that's fair. He was a great college goalie, and he was new.
Yeah, but I think you're forgetting one important element. Like, you're right, like he wasn't established, but that one season he had, what was everybody in hockey talking about?
Yeah.
They were talking about the big goalie.
Yeah, he won everything.
This big giant goalie, and there was no room in the net, and like he was such a novelty at then that it wasn't, I don't recall that there was a big controversy by Dryden being in the net.
Well,
So-
the controversy was in reading about this is the fact that Esposito was clearly, with Rogie Vachon and a couple others were in the top echelon of goaltenders at that point. And he was the one who played less, and Dryden was the one that they went with in games 6, 7, and 8, I think. I think Esposito lost in game 5, and then they went with Dryden the rest of the way. And I'm just like, I know people were criticizing the fact that they were going with Dryden because Dryden was so bad. The Russians were beating him regularly. I mean, the last game was 6-5. It wasn't exactly a goaltending clinic between him and Tretiak. So
yeah, but there was a romance that was undeniable with Dryden.
Well, here's the question.
No, the other thing. Go
If
ahead.
the tournament happens 1 year later, I mean, Bernie Perrant's in that mix. Because think about where this is.
Well,
Bernie Perrant wins the Stanley Cup.
He was in the WHA.
He was in WHA at that point?
Yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. There's another guy.
He left the Leafs and he went to play in the WHA, and then he only came back in, I think, 74. The other thing was Paul Henderson. I think I will continue to say he deserves to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame. When you're and I'm not besmirching guys like Vakulov, Nedemansky, or some of the Russian players who have been let in, but their record is based on international play. And Henderson had a good NHL career, but when it came down to it, the guy who scores the winning goal in games 6, 7, and 8. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
I would say this: we've all interviewed Henderson. I've interviewed Henderson. I'm on the fence about it, but I probably would lean towards putting him in. I just want to tell you, in one of the chapters of Ken Dryden's book here, he was invited to camp like everybody else in May, and so he still had to win a job. It wasn't like they just handed it to him.
Right.
No, that's for sure. I'm just like Russ today. I have been on the fence on this just because I know the importance and significance of him. Everybody knows where they were when Henderson scored in Canada. I was talking to Tom Laidlaw today, and they always say that that, people in America know where they were when man landed on the moon, when Kennedy was shot. And they also know where they were when, Mike Eruzione scored. Well, in Canada, Tom Laidlaw said they brought televisions in so everybody could watch at school and all that. However, Mike Eruzione is not in the U.S. Hall of Fame because it was considered a singular event, and his body of work, Henderson's body of work is not Hall of Fame quality, but that tournament, for sure. So
I agree 100%, Cal. I was going to say the same thing. Mike Eruzione, I mean, he should be in there if Henderson goes in there. I honestly feel like it's it. I think those are the two biggest goals in North American hockey history.
Well, I mean, Eruzione is one of the greatest goals in all of sports.
Right.
Because it was done on the Olympic stage. Most people in America have no idea about Paul Henderson.
Right, exactly.
So, but everybody in the world knows about Eruzione because it was on the Olympic stage, which, we all know how much bigger that is than, even the Super Bowl. So
right. And if you want to go whole performance, I mean, Jim Craig's performance in that whole thing was
but
ridiculous.
you can't start putting everybody in. I think
this is the problem, right? This is why we end up on the fence.
Well,
no,
and their teams are in.
But what Kevin is saying is Eruzione was a singular event. I'm not saying Bobby Thompson should be in the Baseball Hall of Fame because of the shot heard around the world. I'm saying Henderson had a good NHL career that was capped by not one, not two, but 3 goals in 3 consecutive games in our most important.
Nobody cares about anything but the 1 goal, though, Mike.
I know.
Yeah, and the other thing, that's still a singular event. It was one tournament. Right. So, I mean, I think it's a fun argument, and I think it's entertaining, and I don't have any problem with you thinking he should be in there. I don't think you're wrong. I just think it's hard, and it's hard to put him in when, they give you the speech when you're on those committees where they say, we're looking for extraordinary.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're talking about a body of work, and they even make a point, at least they have in the ones I've been on, about, we're not, you don't boil it down to 1 goal or one game or all that. So it's just hard, but I mean, I'm all for people who want to argue that. I think that's a real fun argument.
No, it is a real fun argument.
Yeah, there aren't many people in Canada who are more memorable than Paul Henderson.
Yeah. I mean that even even an American hockey player, even American hockey fans know that name and know that situation.
Yeah, less than you think.
Yeah, I guess the hardcore ones do. But
yeah, I remember one of my favorite at the World Cup of Hockey in 1996 when Ron Wilson went to see Tony Amani, and he said, I want you to be our Paul Henderson tonight. And Amani said, who the hell is Paul Henderson? So that was, And he said, and he explained who he is. He said, well, I'm Italian. I'd rather be Mike Eruzione. So, but that's a true story that was confirmed to me by Amante and by Ron Wilson. That's exactly how that conversation went. Amante said, "Who the hell is Paul Henderson?"
That's awesome. I mean, it was just. I think that it's an incredible story. Obviously, it's so long ago, and it's good to keep talking about it because I know most of the people watching this podcast have no idea about it, and we're getting old, we're getting old, and the reality is and I'm, like I said, I was 4 years old, so I don't remember it, but I always
was 9, but really they didn't promote it in the States.
I was 5, but I had the benefit of being on a border town that got the Canadian TV. My brother watched it. I probably did watch it, but just don't remember since
it may have been in the newspaper, and I may have skipped over it. You know what I mean?
I watched it. So
you watched it, right? So you remember?
Yeah, I was a teenager. So
right.
Yeah.
So the funniest thing, just as a side for a second. So I'm down in the shore house where my parents used to go when I was a kid. My aunt recently passed away. We're at her house down there at the shore. It's visiting with my cousins, and my mom tells me this is the room where you watched the moon landing. And I was two maybe. What? Yeah, the moon landing was 69.
69.
Yeah, I think I was 1.5. And it was the weirdest thing because as she said that to me, I got the weirdest flash in my head of not a memory, but just a feeling I could almost remember it for a second. I didn't have any idea that I watched the moon landing. I didn't know where I was, but it was the strangest thing. I was in that room and I could picture the black and white TV being in that corner. And I said, was the black and white TV in that corner? And she said, yeah, that's where we used to keep the black and white TV. And I said, wow, that's crazy. I mean, obviously, as that young of a kid, it was an unbelievable moment. So everybody,
it made an impression. I mean, I know exactly where I was, what I was doing. I was 6. I knew.
Yeah. I mean, I was so young.
It's a great event. Yeah.
But for those who are young and don't remember it, if you have the ability to watch CBC tonight at 8:00, that's they're I think it's part 3 of the 4-part documentary, and it's really unbelievable. Some of the archival footage that they have, and like 16 and 8mm film that added to the sort of color of what you see.
Watch the movie. The movie's pretty good.
I love
it was vicious hockey. I mean, it was 1970s style.
Oh yeah,
this is right before the Broad Street Bullies, on the eve of the Broad Street Bullies.
It was a heated series.
Everybody talks about the Bobby Clark baseball swing on Harlamoff, but there was that was par for the course. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, it built up to that. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Well, there was a lot at stake, after Canada goes down, after Canada's down 3-1 in that series, it's like that. I think the whole thing of they took a game, they it wasn't just like I said, just kind of like a little bit of like a expedition. There'll be a goodwill feeling between Canada and Russia or whatever, and that it got real serious real fast. Like it was not a matter of wait a second.
After that series, they didn't join hands and say
no,
they did not. The crazy other thing about the story that I never realized is that 3,000 Canadian fans were over there. That they went over to Russia in the last. And
I'll tell you, if you played an international tournament right now in the middle of the war zone in Ukraine, Canada people would still show up.
That was an amazing thing. The thing about that, though, 1972, you know how hard it was to get to Russia?
Yeah.
I mean, how expensive it must have been to get to Russia? How there and 3,000 Canadian fans. It's like that's an insane thing. I mean,
I didn't know that. That's a fun fact.
I didn't know that either.
It's crazy. I was listening to Phil Esposito, and he said he was talking to one of the other guys from the tournament. They're going back and forth, and he's like, you know what? I'll tell you, the guy says to Phil, if it wasn't for those 3,000 Canadians over there, I don't know that we would have won that thing. And Phil's like, you know what? I always said that. I agree 100% that was such a big thing that we had that they were there was such an enormous thing.
I'm pretty sure that during one of the games, the Soviet police tried to take away Alan Eagleson, and they.
Oh yes, no, I heard about that.
Oh yeah, that's a famous story. Yeah,
it was crazy. There was a goal where the goal light didn't go on, and he was rushing down there. It was just it's a weird cast of characters. All became infamous in different ways as time went on. I heard Mahavlich talking about he was on the team, I guess, and he thought he shouldn't be. He actually said, I thought Guy Carbonneau should be on the team, is what he said, Mike, just like you're saying here. But he said that
Frank Mahavlich should have been on the team. The question is, Peter Mahavlich was on the team.
That's what I'm talking about. Sorry,
he
Peter
hadn't
Mahavlich
really established himself. I mean,
but he was on there because the coach we were just talking about, right, Harry? Right, Harry?
Harry Senden, yeah.
Said that I'll coach this team, but I want 2 players, and it's got to be. It was Serge Savard. Whoever's like, well, of course, Serge Savard will be there. No problem. And Pete Mahavlich, which is the craziest. That's why he was there. And it's just that's the whole thing that Kevin says about coaches,
Which is weird because Sinden was the GM of Boston, and that's the arch rival of Montreal. So
who did Mahavlich want on? Because it wasn't Guy Carbonneau. He wasn't even around yet. So.
No, not Guy Carbonneau. I'm sorry. I'm Gilbert Perreault. I'm sorry, Gilbert Perreault.
Yeah.
And he said Gilbert Perreault should have been there over me all day long.
And he was really great in the first 5 games, and then they basically said we're going to narrow the roster to a smaller amount.
Right. Gilbert Perreault. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Some news before we get into the Florida preview. The came out yesterday. John Tavares suffered a strained oblique muscle, and he's going to be out. They said a minimum of 3 weeks. He's probably going to miss the first couple weeks of the regular season, so it's not a disastrous injury, but obviously you'd like to be 100%, have everybody on hand when it comes to the start of the regular season. So
obliques can linger, though. You have to let it fully.
That's why they're going to be careful. They said a minimum of 3 weeks, but I'll bet you it's closer to 4, maybe 5.
Yeah.
So they'll be.
You know what the word oblique means?
What's that?
Do you know what the word oblique means? I was like oblique muscle. I was trying to figure out what muscle.
I just know it's your side muscle. I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
The word oblique, because there's a famous like thing in music industry called the oblique strategies, which was put out by Brian Eno, who's like a
Oh yeah, I know who Brian knows.
right, and it's a card set that you get, and the oblique strategies was that if you were stuck on like if you had a creative block, you would pull one of these cards randomly, and it would say something like play the chord progression backwards, or it would just say something like it was completely set up to. It's a really neat oblique strategies. There's I think there's an iPhone app for it now, but there was and I have a card set from like way back when about this. So I always think of the word oblique. I'm sorry, this is a totally aside, but I always think of oblique as being, this randomish word that, that means like strange and obscure. So then when I heard, oblique muscle or whatever today.
Yeah, it's basically the side of your, rib cage /
Right.
down, so they're going to be careful, but they, of course, I was listening to some Toronto radio just to see what, and they were like panicked that all of a sudden Alex Kerfoot is going to be the number 2 center. Alex Kerfoot is a center. He had almost 40 assists last year.
He's a good center. He's fine.
He's a decent player, and it's not like it's an ACL tear and he's going to be out 6 months. They're just going to be careful, and it's obviously they would rather have him in the lineup than not in the lineup, but I don't think it's a reason to panic.
No, yeah, I mean. I want everyone should definitely also, by the way, check out Kevin's article from today that I put up on my spot because it was that good. You really hit the questions, man. You are a pro to no end, Kevin, my friend.
I appreciate that. It just, things that I've kind of everyone seemed to be talking about, and I threw them out there just to see how people, think.
Anyone else would make a blog out of each one of these, but you're so good you don't have to. Like you can put all 5 of these up there, and they're all totally incredible discussion topics. Like,
well, that's for sure. I mean, and those are discussions I've had with people around the league. So
yeah, and definitely read the article. It's who will get more points, Gaudreau or Huberdeau? Which one of the goalies will have the most impact on their new team? That's an enormous discussion. We will have to talk about these at some point too. But they are definitely worth checking out. So definitely.
Well, I will say, just for Mike's sake and my own, Matt Murray's first game is tonight. Just saying.
Yeah,
he is.
Although Russ, I was talking with somebody yesterday and said, boy, Samsonov looked really good in that first game against Ottawa. And I'm like, hey, there's 2 things. A, it's preseason, so you don't put any stock in anything. B, you know who the best goalie in the Leafs camp was in the preseason last year? His initials were PM, Peter Mrazek.
Yeah, sure.
He was injured and stunk last year. So, the only thing that I think the Leaf fans should be concerned about watching that game tonight is Matt Murray, how he looks, how comfortable he is, and if he doesn't get injured. That's all they should be concerned about.
All right, so let's talk Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers, President's Trophy winners, very rarely do what the Florida Panthers did this offseason. And to think about that, there's a lot. They really did. It was a fascinating team because last year when I talked to people in Florida, as the year was going on, and it was apparent that they were going to be one of the top teams in the league record-wise, that they were going to actually keep doing it, and they would win games. And I would talk about a lot on this show about how I thought they were getting a little bit lucky. How I thought that they were, as much as I liked the moves that Bill Zito did, I thought they were getting lucky with it, and they definitely. They won so many overtime games, and they won so many close games. But they still kept going, and even the impression I was getting from the Panthers themselves was we're getting a little bit lucky. I got that too, as like from talking to people in the organization. I knew they weren't satisfied with where they went to, so with where they were, and then in the playoffs, I think against Tampa things became blatantly obvious that, and even I would say against Florida in the playoffs, things became obvious that they weren't quite really where they thought they were. They weren't as good as their record, and they weren't a President's Trophy team.
Well, they had a tough time getting by Washington. Washington was up 2-1 in the series and had them down with less than a minute to go, and then they tied it up, and Verhaeghe got the game-winning goal in Game 4, and then they went on from
Game
there.
4, Mike. Washington had a 3-goal lead on them. Like that. Remember that early in that game, like they came back to win that game, like you said, at the last minute. But that game was ridiculous. It was like they were very close to falling down 3-1, and they didn't look good at all. And there were all kinds of issues. Their power play fell apart last year in the playoffs. If you remember, that was the thing that they couldn't do. They couldn't score at all.
Right.
They didn't score against Tampa a single power play goal.
Right.
In the whole series. Against Florida, they had issues too. all these issues, I think, piled up, and then they ended up, making a lot of trades last year, and a lot of people are now that Spencer Knight's been signed to another extended, which is an important thing to talk.
Well, let me ask Kevin this to start off with.
Let me finish this concept this whole time, then for sure. Okay, so Spencer Knight's been signed to he's going to be making $4.5 million starting next year. That means starting next year, if things go as they are right now, the Panthers will have the most expensive goaltending duo in the history of the NHL for 3 years.
No, they won't.
$14.5 million per year between Bobrovsky and Spencer Knight. Now, obviously, I don't think that's going to happen. Like Mike, you shake your hand. I think there's a plan. I don't think that Spencer Knight contract gets signed without a plan. I haven't gotten confirmation that there's a plan, but I think there's a plan. So there you have that. But the bigger thing, the two big moves was, one, remember that this team started off last year with Quenneville, a coach that had experience. And as the year went on, obviously Quenneville drops out. They go to Burnett, who does well, but I don't think shows up big enough, and his experience didn't have enough experience in the playoffs to manage this team when things weren't working, which is when you need an experienced coach. Then they immediately went to a very experienced coach in Paul Maurice. They went and got an experienced coach who is a controversial coach. Who's I talk to players who love him. I talk to players who absolutely hate him. That's not too different than Quenneville, to be honest. But I do think that he's going to bring in some experience that's really important for them. But then the biggest change is leaving the Jonathan Huberdeau era behind, which has been something that has been a part of the Florida Panthers, even when they were down, for a very long time. This has been the positive thing about Huberdeau. And going to the Matthew Tkachuk era, which is, again, Zito's kind of has tended to make this team tougher in every way. He wants tougher players. They are very physical. They beat teams up. So that's my summary of where they are right now. Is it good? Are they better? Are they worse? Go ahead, Mike. You can go now. Sorry.
Okay, I'll be brief because I want to ask Kevin a question.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this before. I think they're different. I don't know if they're better. I don't think that they're better. I look at up front. I mean, obviously, Huberdeau and Tkachuk are two different type of players. But Huberdeau had, I think, 85 assists last year. Tkachuk is more of a goal scorer, and he's a professional disturber of the highest order. So, in the Atlantic Division, the presence of Matthew with Florida and Brady in Ottawa is going to, I think, give a new picture to the entire division. But Duclair is out. I don't know how long. I think they say at least till Christmas. But Kevin, the thing I look at is their defense with the departure of Weegar is not. I think it's average at best, and it's tenuous because Ekblad has had trouble staying healthy. And if Ekblad drops, then your number one defenseman is Brandon Montour. That's not a championship defense.
Yeah, if you talk to people around the league, their perception of why Burnett lost his job was the lack of improvement on that defense. Everyone points out that no matter what kind of coach you are, generally when you take over a new team, you can get them to play better defense because everyone's on their best behavior. They're trying to earn more playing time. So everybody just plays better defensively because they know that's what a new coach is going to want. They just never did that. They just never were able to play better defense under him, and it cost them. And now I'm with Mike. They're not better than they were last year defensively.
Yeah,
and that's going to cost them again in the postseason. I don't know what their plan is either. I mean, obviously they want to try to get rid of Bobrovsky, but I think that's going to be easier said than done. I don't even think we'll get to the playoffs without Spencer Knight being the number one goalie. In fact, I'm writing that today, that I think the fact that they've got him signed, they gave him big money, is just a message to fans that Spencer Knight is here. Yeah. He's in the mix. You don't pay that guy 4.5 to be a backup goalie. Now, it sounds ludicrous to say that when the other guy's making 10. So you don't pay him either to be a backup goalie. So clearly they're going to try to figure something out. But I don't know how this is going to work, where they're going to ship him. I mean, there'll be some desperate teams if, Toronto's goaltending situation blows up or Edmonton's situation blow up. But I don't, I just don't know how you're going to be able to move him. And buying him out doesn't seem to be very attractive to me. So,
I'm with Mike. I don't love the defense. I think they're 3 strong on D. I'll give them that, and that's not counting Gudis. I think Lucas Carlson's pretty good. But, yeah, they have some problems there. They are experimenting. I didn't love seeing that they were experimenting with Anton Lundell on the top line wing. He's a center. He was born to be a center. He was already 44% last year in faceoffs.
Yeah.
Like, he's a penalty killer. His giveaways are much lower than his takeaways. Why in the world would you take him away from the center position? It doesn't make sense. But again, maybe it's just Maurice just trying something. I won't kill him on that because I doubt it'll happen. I think they're not as good because, you lose Uyghur, they're not as good. Kachuk is nice to have, but they mortgaged a lot to get him.
Yeah. And
they're a playoff team, and they're going to have to make defensive moves at the deadline to really go far in the playoffs. They're going to have to pick up at least one good one. I mean, their third pair is Mark Stahl on it. Like, again, that was fine for Detroit. It's not really fine for a playoff team.
Yeah, a buyout of Bobrovsky would only save them $3.3 million each of the next 3 years. So, that's not a significant enough of a savings. You'd probably rather keep them or either retain that money on a trade, and maybe you can move him as a $6.6 million.
He was really good last year, guys. Like, remember that he's coming off a great season. Like, not just a good season, but a great season.
But to Kevin's point, Ak, is that you can't have, if Spencer Knight takes over the job and he's the number one, you can't have a $10 million backup. You just can't.
No, and the big thing is they're going to miss Anthony Duclair because he's out with that Achilles, and they don't know when he's coming back, and that's why they're trying to maybe add more scoring on the wing, but I still would try and do something else and not put Lundell there.
They scored 337 goals last year, Russ. I think they're going to be okay without Duclair.
Well, okay.
But again, you took away some guys. Matthew, you can add Kachuk, but he's never going to score the same way as Huberdeau does.
Yeah, Huberdeau assisted on almost 25% of those goals, and I read a story of Huberdeau's reaction to Zito when Zito called him and told him that he'd been traded to Calgary, and let's just say it was expletive laced, and he hung up the phone on him. And I'm not saying that's unusual, because I'm sure there's a number of players throughout history who have been surprised by the trade. But Kev, what I'm wondering is, Huberdeau was firmly ensconced with that organization. Him and Barkov were 1A and 1B. And, I know that there was probably some uncertainty about him getting an extension in Florida, and they go the direction of Kachuk, but there's no way to know whether this is going to be a smooth transition from Huberdeau to Kachuk.
Yeah, all we know historically the Kachucks are great team players, and they're always kind of well liked, that went with their father, that goes with both the kids. So, you can sort of assume that the transition will be. And he's also, most hockey players are going to understand that Kachuk is more valuable in the playoffs than
which is something that they need, right? And also I'm sorry, Kevin, but don't discount the fact that Zito is very tied into American hockey, knows Kachuk really well.
Yeah, but I think goals again. That's my point. They're going to be scoring fewer goals.
Yeah. Well, one thing too. Now, I think the argument will be that it'll play differently, but as I pointed out, and I did it on this show, but I also have done it to people around the league, and nobody got it right. When I'd say, how many hits do you think Kachuk had last year? He just didn't hit all that much, last year, because he scored a lot of goals. He was busy scoring goals. I do think he'll be more physical in the East. He'll go back to sort of being who he is, but I think that was by design. I think they wanted him to score a little more. He was playing with a great line, and it takes energy and it takes time to record a lot of hits. So it'll be interesting to see how he plays, and if he does play that way, can he score 40 or will he be a 30-goal scorer?
Mike's point is a good one. Huberdeau was a guy that helped produce goals. They're going to miss that. And Duclair was one of their better goal guys too. They're missing that too. So their goal total is going to be low.
I think their goal totals are going to suffer for sure. And and their defense, you could argue, without Uyghur will suffer as well. I do agree that I don't think they're President's Trophy team. But I don't think that matters to them that much as, really just being a better playoff team. Like, I think that they feel like they could be a playoff team, and if they're a better playoff team, that'll matter, right? So
one step back to take 2 steps forward. But
a little bit, and the other thing is people always, rip on, he's traded away a lot of, they've traded away a lot of first round draft picks there. Obviously they gave up a lot last year to get Sherratt and Giroux and make a run for it, because they were a President's Trophy team at that point, and you kind of have to take a run for it, I guess. But I think that's not something that I think that they look at their team very differently than other teams do. I've said it before. They are trying to keep excitement going in that place. They are trying to make sure that excitement, and the Tkachuk trade is definitely a move that, they saw a season ticket boost after that. It's an exciting thing. They realize that they have to keep when you're going to ask a Florida hockey fan to wait like 3 years for this junior hockey player who's drafted in the first round at the end of the first round to come through, that doesn't do anything. It's not going to do anything for them right now. That's where they are. How long they can hold that up. And the other thing that I think is very important to remember with Bill Zito that people just don't seem to really understand is that he was an agent who was not like a big time agent. So he made his living getting players who were less than stellar superstars. So he feels in his mind that he's used to the concept of making something out of second and third round and fourth round picks, not first round picks. Like, he knows the first round picks are going to be, in his mind, a little bit overhyped, but he can find the gems later on. And I think that that's what he's going to do for it. And then, we'll see.
Yeah, that's fine. But again, history will show you could only go so far with that.
Yeah. Well, I think the message about Zito is that in a short period of time, he's already among the league's most aggressive general managers.
For sure.
He's involved in every trade that is made around the league. He pokes his nose in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, he tries to figure out whether, he can improve his team. And, I've said this many times, but in his first year there, he changed half the roster. The only guys who do that are guys like him, Jim Rutherford, someone who was another aggressive guy as well. Yeah. But Zito has been very, very aggressive. And how many people would have had the courage to make the Huberdeau Tkachuk deal? I mean, he gave up a lot of assets. He obviously knew he could sign Tkachuk or he wouldn't have made it. But but still, I mean, it's still a bold move, as you mentioned. Huberdeau was a popular player, though he was doing that in Florida and not Toronto or New York. Or you can trade away popular players a little easier in Florida than you can in original 6 cities. So, but I think Zito's been a big part of why they're contenders. There's no doubt.
Yeah,
and I'm looking at the list of pending free agent defensemen and who they might target at the deadline. Now they have cap restrictions, but like a guy who sort of stands out based on Zito's connection to Columbus is Gavrikov, and he probably wouldn't cost him a ton in a deal. And he's he's a borderline top 4 guy. He's a 4 or 5. I mean, impact wise, defensemen at the deadline: Klingberg, Dumba, Orlov, Travis Sanheim. There's no
problem is he's running out of assets to get those guys.
Right.
There is.
An interesting thing in August, when you look at their transaction list on August 6, 2022, they basically hired an entire new, like I was looking at the, I didn't even know this until now, that they named a new senior vice president of events. They needed a vice president of sales and services. They named the new chief operating officer. They
because they had a good team and they weren't selling tickets.
Right. They weren't selling tickets and they replaced everybody.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by that. But I think that, there's
showing up to watch this team. They're a good team.
Yeah, it's honestly an absolute travesty, and I've talked about this before. But for a team that won a President's Trophy, for a team that's exciting, offensive, to watch games on a Tuesday night in Sunrise and see the lower bowl basically empty is offensive. I mean, there are a lot of cities where if you give them that team, I don't care if it's a weekday or a weekend, though every seat is filled. So. Hopefully they're coming to grips with the fact this is a good team and they should be, going and watching them. But it just irks me to no end that there's a team that's been good for a few years and nobody goes to watch them.
Maybe they should show Matthew Tkachuk guzzling a beer at a Dolphins game. Something.
I think you're going to see that kind of stuff. I think you're going to see that kind of stuff. I really do. I think you're going to see Kachuk playing to the crowd.
It's not the worst way to get him ingratiated.
And Huberdeau he's such a humble French Canadian guy. He's so really just. And I think that Kachuk is, when he fights somebody, he's going to be the guy running into the box, putting his hands up in the air like this. That's something that Florida kind of needs. That's kind of the kind of thing that they need. They need arrogance. And there's nothing. Huberdeau is as classy as you get.
Because even Barkov, while he is a tremendous player, doesn't leave a big footprint as far as being a celebrity.
No, he doesn't. And the closest they have is probably I don't know, maybe Ekholm. I'm sorry.
I don't think they had one.
Ekblad, I would say Ekblad is the closest they probably have to that. He's got a bit of an attitude, but he doesn't. And my biggest disappointment is that they didn't. There were some guys they lost that were very key to me as far as their team goes.
I'll just liken it to like with Ekblad. Guys on the Yankees now, Giancarlo Stanton. He got paid the most money in baseball on the Marlins, and nobody cared.
Yeah.
Right. He had 59 home runs with the Marlins, and no Yankee fan cares about that. He won an MVP there. They care about what he's doing now, and he's hitting 215. So, but
it's weird.
Players they lost, some of the forwards they lost, and I really think that they're gonna miss. Like I really do. That to me is the biggest issue that I have with them. They just lost some really good. Claude Giroux is not a big deal, but Mason Marchment, he's a big deal. That's a big deal. And that's a big deal, And I've also talked about Vetrano, these guys who I just thought were like really, they were part of them winning those games last year, like by 1 or 2 goals, And they got to replace those character guys. They will with Kachuk. But Kachuk's got it. You want Marchment. If you have Marchment and Kachuk would be even bolder. That's the kind of thing you really need to have, that sort of thing, I think.
Well, Marchment would take the burden off of Kachuk to be as physical as he can be. Marchment,
yeah.
That was found money. I'm sure they want Dennis Malgin back, right, Russ? I'll just say this to
Although he would start for the Leafs now.
I think Florida is a playoff team. I don't think that they are going to win the division. That's my prediction.
I don't know yet. I'm not, but we'll definitely get into it for sure when we do our predictions. But I think that I'm not sure that they're a playoff team, and I'm not sure that I'm not going to have them win the division yet.
You don't think they're a playoff team?
I'm kind of with Kevin. I think they're gonna need that they're gonna need Spencer Knight to step up and show that. I think there's gonna have to be some things. I think they are a playoff team. I do, but I
do too. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think I'm gonna put in the playoffs, but I think they're gonna be battling. I don't think it's gonna be a given. It's not gonna be a given. I think Tampa and Toronto. Tampa for sure has a clearer path. Toronto could also be battling. So
Toronto is the only.
I don't know if Tampa has a clear path. They have a path.
So the thing with Tampa is they don't care about winning the division. They care about being.
Yeah, Tampa's in the playoffs, though. Tampa's in the playoffs.
Toronto could win the division, and it would be almost meaningless based on the fact that if they lose in the first round again, then the season is a joke.
Yeah.
Just one note before we end.
Yes.
Chris Johnson is reporting Sean Couturier will not require surgery on his back. They're calling him week to week. Russ, it doesn't sound like this is something like he's not going to be back on November the 1st. It sounds like
I said from the beginning I felt like it was going to be 2 months after I heard like herniated disc. I honestly wasn't thinking he was going to need surgery, but I know people were talking about that possibility. I felt more positive about that, and I still think it's going to be 2 months.
Let me just plant a seed here. I don't want to get into this because this is a half-hour conversation, but are we reaching the point where players should back off on off-season conditioning?
We could be. It's a fair point.
Amazing. Yeah, we're losing a lot of guys in the
non-contact injuries are up, it seems, this year.
Yeah. Well, this is such a weird sport because it was always a sport where the best players weren't in super great shape, and I think that has something to do with flexibility that you lose when you build muscle. Like I think that I think it comes down to we really need more like yoga and more flexibility with these guys. And less muscle mass.
Who's into yoga is all the retired players.
Right.
Last week at the opening of Leafs training camp, Tavares talked about how good he felt coming into training camp, that after last year where he couldn't start his summer conditioning until later on because he was still recovering from the concussion, that sort of set him back at the beginning of last season. This year, he was did everything he wanted to, and then he comes into training camp, and in the third day he pulls an oblique. So who's to say what works and what doesn't work? But the number of serious injuries, you just have to shake your head.
Yeah, it is really.
No, but I mean, if you look at the Flyers as an example, what Kevin's saying, Couturier non-contact, Farabee some sort of workout injury, like you would like to know.
Yeah,
I'm sure the Flyers are going to figure this out. What were they doing for their workouts? And, because maybe they are going to back off of weights a little bit.
Max Pacioretty.
Yeah.
Max Pacioretty is a good point. I mean, and there are some, the other thing we're not going to talk about today that's kind of crazy is the amount of players that are in some of these camps still, like at this point in time right now.
I mean, here's one thing I would do, and I know Kevin has talked about this because it's expensive, and we all think that when players come in and they get their physicals that everybody's getting like a full body scan and a full workup, but they're really not. But it does make you wonder if key elements of players should be checked, like Achilles and things like that, before they start working out.
Yeah.
It's like, these injuries are on the rise now, and it almost would be good to be preventative about it and just check it out, send it to a doctor and see what he says about what he feels like the long-term view is on that player.
But Russ, this is how random all these injuries are. And I know it's a different sport, but it's a good indicator.
Yeah.
Sterling Shepard, the wide receiver for the Giants, came back from a torn Achilles this year, played great the first 2 games. Last play in the Dallas Giants game, running down the field, no contact whatsoever, blows out his ACL and is done.
But that's because of artificial turf. That's what that is. That's
maybe
the hallmark of artificial turf. The NFL, if they had grass, you wouldn't have that injury.
Maybe.
Very true. Very true. All right, it's all the time we have for today, folks. More games tonight on tap, we'll definitely be talking about as we go along here some of the players that are starting to impress us in the preseason. And make sure you check out all the stuff. And the other thing, real quick for everybody, the Hockey Buzz Super League is up and running. So this is our fantasy league that we have. It's a really fun league. It's the real time stats. You put a lineup, a salary capped lineup up every night against somebody else once a week. And there are 2 different tiers to the league. There's a tier if you're a season ticket holder, and there's a tier if you're not a season ticket holder. So there's a free version of it, or there's the $20 a year season ticket holder. I honestly want to throw this out there because I'm not just tooting our own horn. I don't know why the hell anyone would not be a season ticket holder if you go to Hockey Buzz, because these guys on here are writers. They don't see it, but there's no advertising if you're a season ticket holder on HockeyBuzz.com. Like you go through it, there's advertising. Actually, like when you go through, you'll see banner ads, stuff like that. That's a hell of a thing, and honestly, for me, it's worth it. So. Yeah, if you go to the season ticket holders section of Hockey Buzz, and you'll see there. You might see ads in some of the little blogs and stuff like that, but it's a totally different experience. And also, you get much better prizes if you join the Super League in the season ticket holder area. So go check it out for sure. And remember, without the buzz, it is just hockey. We will all talk to you tomorrow.